part of that. And as Monica said, it is the most underreported crime in our country by far. It's probably that's echoed on the world stage as well. And you have to ask, like we do with the drug flow, like Monica says, most people, oh, that's not going on in this country. Just kind of off the wall
random
things.
Yeah, I love it.
Since you didn't have time to prep, you kind of had to answer honestly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
I think
thought
it's
that
a
was
good
kind
idea.
of clever.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
like that.
Well, I guess I will do a quick intro and we'll just hit it off and just talk.
Sounds great.
Good. Cool. Well, welcome to the Matt and Monica podcast, where we have Bob Dougherty. 25 years.
Sorry.
25 years in the CIA. Sorry, babe. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you for being on.
Yes.
We're excited.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure and honor to be on.
Yeah. And I would go into this with way more imposter syndrome, but we already talked like last week, and I realized you are very easy to talk to.
Oh, yeah. That was such a good conversation.
Yeah, because I was not gonna lie, I was kind of terrified to talk to you. But
Please,
you were up you were up there with Lieutenant General Lucky. I mean, if anybody watches that episode, they'll see me. I was just quivering the whole time. Just
So your growth from like there then to now.
So I'm just gonna read a quick something just so the listeners have an idea of who you are. Again, 25 years CIA. As a CIA officer, Bob Dougherty tackled dangerous South American cocaine traffickers and hung around cold train stations in Eastern Europe waiting for sources. Now he's applying his counterterrorism skills to an environmental crime and corporate training. Dougherty instructs U.S. Green Berets and Navy SEALs, but on the conservation side, he's teamed up with Andre Krusta. Correct me on the pronunciation.
Yeah, no,
on that.
that's correct.
Okay. And founder of the Earth League International, ELI, to bring down wildlife traffickers. Some estimates suggest that the illegal trade could be worth up to $23 billion a year, much of it linked to China. But anyway, there's a lot more there, and it's all incredibly interesting.
Yeah, but everything you just said is like, wow.
Yeah.
A lot.
And I don't necessarily have any plans of where I wanted to start this conversation, Bob. I just figure we can talk and just see where it brings us.
What we should do is almost do these, like roll over the questions from our last guest. Then.
So as I already told you, we just got done recording a podcast with Lieutenant Colonel Oakland, and he had 2 questions for you. I'm going to start the podcast with those, and I'll allow you to leave a question for my next guest. But the first thing he wanted is, he was curious, in your career, who was the most famous person you've ever had the pleasure of meeting?
Wow, that's a good one. Because I'll have to include like some foreign. I've actually, as a CIA officer, met foreign ministers of state and foreign presidents. I've met terrorist leaders, right? In different circumstances. Met some U.S. celebrities. I guess I would turn that in to say who was the most impressive person that I've met. That's a tough one. Look, there's a lot of the Navy SEALs that I work with, and I wouldn't say the younger generation, but the older generation that, was in before 9/11 and then kind of fought all those counterterrorism wars and then are out now, right? So those guys have a lot of life experience. They're a little bit older like me. Those guys are super interesting guys because they have such an interesting perspective on life, given the highly elite and highly charged thing that they did. And I always enjoy meeting those types of people. Jim Burns comes to mind. He's a training officer for Naval Special Warfare, SRT-1. Now, they have just such great insight in life. And then when you couple it with their combat experiences at a very high level, it just gives you such a unique perspective. I would say a couple of CIA officers who are legendary. Rick Prado, who's the author of a book called Black Ops. It's a New York Times bestseller, was a great role model and mentor for me and someone that I really enjoyed having and still have in my life. And then J.R. Seeger, who's also a legendary CIA officer, a very quiet guy, an anthropologist background, but he was a U.S. Army Ranger captain before he joined the CIA, and he led our first team into Afghanistan after 9/11. So those 2 guys probably are the most interesting, dynamic guys I've met that I could single out, and probably the most famous as well. I don't really count celebrities and politicians as
perspective. Well, his follow-up question is, was there anything in your career that you had to do that you regret with respect to what you're able to talk about, he said?
Yeah, no, I got really lucky. There wasn't. And there's always a lot of controversy surrounding special operations and the CIA and covert action and what we do. I never got involved in, some of the stuff that was controversial, like enhanced interrogation and waterboarding and some of that stuff. It would have been interesting if it would have been presented to me. I always think about how I would have reacted. Like, would I have gone along with that? Would I have said, no, thank you, this isn't for me? It's interesting, and Matt, this, or maybe it slipped your mind, but when you entered service too, we all swore an oath. Whatever federal agency you're part of, military or any other federal agency, you swear an oath when you enter on duty that first day. And it's interesting because the oath, if you remember, Matt, is to the Constitution of the United States, to defend from all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's not to the administration in power. It's not to the president. It's not to whatever politician is there. So I think as federal officers, we have that in our back pocket. And I always wondered, and I'm always fascinated by stories of people in a situation where they say, hey, I'm not doing this, even though I've been ordered to do it, because I believe that's against my oath to defend the Constitution, even though I may have a superior ordering me to do that. And we always have that right as federal officers, as U.S. military. So I always kind of thought about that hopefully I would have reacted if I would have been put in a situation that I wasn't okay with by saying, hey, no, under my oath as a federal officer, I'm not doing this. But I never had to. So no regrets. I'm really lucky and blessed in that way.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
So who was Bob before the CIA?
Bob was a Valley kid, slightly upper middle class. Both parents attended college, but both were in public service. My mom was a school teacher. My dad was a probation officer for the county of LA and then became a supervisor for our local county here outside LA. So, kind of blue collar background, public education, Valley guy in the suburbs, growing up in Southern California in the 70s and 80s and 90s, high school, bunch of guys that are still my friends, right?
Awesome.
I went to college here locally, UCLA, got some friends from there still. And then, it just kind of was that surfer, California boy, got good grades, was a good athlete, played sports in high school. And, enjoyed the lifestyle out here, work all through high school and all through college, which I think was important. That was kind of our generation. Not a lot of my generation didn't work, at least part-time through high school or college. So I think that helped forge us. Mm-hmm. So kind of this, and when I joined the CIA, I think of my class of 60 people that were part of that class that year. Mm-hmm. I was the only one who physically came from west of the Mississippi. So that kind of showed you back in the day, the CIA is kind of biased towards the East Coast, right? So of course I had the nickname of California Bob, right? Yeah. So I kind of went in there and I kind of had this laid back California West Coast style and it suited me well. And I ended up doing well with that. So that's kind of who I was.
Yeah.
What's that?
What made you want to join?
Yeah, that's a great question, Monica. I get that a lot. I think, so this is the way I explain it. I graduated from UCLA in 1985. So if you think about that time period, we had just come out of kind of a dark era of the gas embargo. Jimmy Carter was president. Hostages in Iran were held for 444 days. The economy was not doing good. It wasn't a great time for America. And then Ronald Reagan gets elected and takes office in 1985. And he really starts turning things around, right? The hostages get released. He makes America this bright, shining city on the hill, right? American exceptionalism. And you could just feel, I remember getting out of college that year, you could just feel this spirit of, wanting to give back. Out of all of us young guys who were getting out of college, or at least the guys that I hung around. And so I knew I wanted to serve. And I actually applied to the DEA. I applied to the FBI. I applied to CIA. I probably would have gone in the military if I hadn't gotten in one of those. So that's what kind of drove me, kind of that feeling in the country during that time period.
Okay.
Cool.
That's awesome. How old were you when you joined?
I was young. I was 24. So that's really young. And it's funny, there was like 3 or 4 other 24-year-olds in my class with me. We were the youngest one by far. So we got put into we called ourselves the redheaded stepchildren, right? We got put into a much longer training program. But in retrospect, that totally worked out to my benefit because I got more training. Awesome. And because we got put into different classes, we got to network with a bunch more people than we would have if we would have just stayed in the same training class. So that really kind of helped me during my career as I look back on it now.
I bet network is everything.
Yeah. Did they separate you on purpose?
Yeah, they definitely did. They said, you're so young, not a ton of life experience. We're gonna make your training longer. And so my training program from the time I joined the CIA was 2 years. So, probably a combined year of operations training and then almost a full year of language training before my first deployment overseas. So that's a pretty long training pipeline.
So what did you silo in when you first started? Did you silo in like counterterrorism specifically? Or
Yeah, I got lucky on that, Matt. I mean, I was in the Directorate of Operations. First of all, the CIA is divided into 4 main directorates, right? And the Directorate of Operations, which we also call the clandestine service, those are the undercover guys, right? Those are the ones that say, they can't say they work for the CIA. We usually say we work for State Department or DOD or whatever. And we're the ones that go out there and spot, assess, develop, and recruit human sources that provide the raw intelligence to us to answer questions of our policymakers. And then we have a directorate of analysts who are probably the best analysts in the U.S. government, master's degrees, PhDs. They take all that raw intelligence, including open source intelligence now, and they write finished intelligence pieces for the policymakers in our government. And then we have a science and technology directorate and a support directorate as well. So I was on the operations side, so I knew I wanted to do that. And then my first posting, I just kind of happened into a posting in Lima, Peru, where there was a big counterterrorism problem. And so I kind of just drifted into it. And then I really liked it. And I never kind of stopped doing that, working that as kind of my specialty, among other things as well. So I kind of just lucked into it, to tell you the truth.
Cool.
During your training process, what was like the hardest part during the 2 years?
I think, again, I got so lucky, Monica, whatever. I got through it pretty well, did fairly well, I think. Language was tough, but it wasn't insurmountable. Can you imagine? This is the way the agency does it, at least for us, for Spanish. I took Spanish. I sat in a classroom 8 hours a day. There was me and another student, and we had 2 teachers. So that was the ratio. And then so for 8 hours a day for 6 months, you sat in there learning Spanish, reading, writing, and speaking. And then at night, you had 3 or 4 hours of homework. So it's really an intense program. But at the end of that 6 months, I came out speaking at about a 3+ level on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being fluent, and understanding and reading and writing at about a 4 level. So it's a pretty damn good program. Now, cool. Other languages take longer, right? Like Arabic and Chinese. Those are 2-year programs that you're in language full time to learn that. So it's a big investment of time. That was probably the most difficult thing during training.
Okay. So this is one of those questions that I know we kind of talked about this a little bit on when we spoke. I want to hear course stories. Everybody wants to hear stories, whatever you're able to talk about. But specifically, do you have anything that comes to mind, just things that I guess change your perspective? Because I'll say in our short interactions that you can generally tell based off of how humble they are and how like they have just such a dissolved ego, like they've seen some shit. And I imagine in your 25 years, you've experienced things that maybe shook your world as far as your perspective and just things that have happened. Do you have any specific instances that were just like really helped change your perspective for better, for worse in your experience?
Yeah, sure. I would say a couple of things, and that's a really good question. I would say so if you take it on the spectrum, not like a single incident, right? Like just over the expanse of my experience, I would say 2 things, and they're kind of the yin and the yang, right? Mm-hmm. I would say it's amazing. I was horrified to learn and continually see how evil we can be to each other in a variety of ways, whether that's human and sex trafficking, whether that's terrorism attacks that kill innocents, whether that's starvation, whether that's grinding poverty, whether that's government corruption, right? Or tribal dynamics or clan dynamics, of how horrible we can be to each other. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, there's a great line in the movie Starman with Jeff Bridges. He's an alien that comes from outer space. And he says, of all the peoples, that we've studied in the galaxy, you guys have this unique quality. You're at your best when things are worst. So I saw that as well, right? And that's kind of the yin and the yang of it. I also saw what I call kind of the quiet, I call it the quiet American exceptionalism. And I keep coming back to that because I do think we are exceptional, not better than anybody else, but we try to be exceptional and we try to do the right thing. And I think if you have a historical perspective, and I only gained this later in my career, at the end of my career, later in my life, if you have a historical perspective of this country, of our country in the world, more often than not, we have done the right thing and the world is better for it. Now, you can say we've done the right thing 55% of the time and the wrong thing 45%. We can argue the percentages of that, but I don't think you can argue more often than not we've done the right thing and the world is a better place. You look at World War I and World War II and the war on terrorism, starvation and poverty and all that. We've tried, we continually stumble towards being better and trying to help people around us. And I think that's unique.
Yeah.
It's not unique among Americans, but we try to do it at a level, because we're so blessed with so much, that we try to do it at a level that's at a higher level, and we try to be a model. And that's kind of interesting to feel as an individual. I kind of look at it as you look around your country and you can see your country struggling to achieve the expectations that we all know it can be. And then you also feel that struggle individually in your own soul as well, to make yourself a better person, to also help that model. So that was an interesting kind of feeling I got towards the end of my career. And then when I say quiet American exceptionalism, I'll give you one specific example, because you asked. In Peru, when I was there, country in South America, beset by a lot of poverty, like a lot of countries down there. The government wasn't exactly, really taking care of the people the way they should. We had a couple of main terrorist groups that were really causing problems. And in fact, Shining Path was almost getting ready to overthrow the country and the government. And we would have had a situation like Pol Pot in Cambodia, where tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people would have been killed. We, the CIA, in an operation that me and several other officers carried out, were able to stop and decapitate that insurgency, that terrorist group, by helping the Peruvian police capture the top leadership over a 2-year period and really end that 20-year insurgency. And at the same time, which brought more safety and security to the country, at the same time, other U.S. government agencies like USAID, the Agency for International Development, and the U.S. State Department were quietly bringing in food and helping feed 1 out of 3 Peruvians. And that never makes the headlines anywhere.
Right.
That doesn't get broadcast in movies or online or on the TV. But here we were, basically, we kind of saved a country. We saved a country from kind of this insurgency, this horrible, savage insurgency like the Islamic State, but communist style in the Shining Path. But we also helped the people get back on their feet to be self-sufficient. And I wonder, how many times is that repeated around the world? And it really gets very little fanfare.
Right. People don't know about that.
And that's, I think, pretty common with just different themes, whether it's, like law enforcement specifically. We have a pretty big supportive perspective when it comes to law enforcement. I think, just in general, people need that positivity right now, because it's just funny. It's how quick does this negative bullshit that happens in this world, it makes the news immediately, and specifically locally, the whole Marcy Correctional thing. I just remember Googling that because I heard about it, and it was every single headline is just what happened there, which, don't get me wrong, when things happen that are not good, yes, I guess there needs to be some sort of spotlight on it, but I just wish it was reciprocated, when it came to positive.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is the fault of our news organizations, and you can't ignore that fact. Like, first of all of them, left and right, are incredibly biased now. It used to be, I used to listen to Walter Cronkite when I was a kid, because my parents would have him on, whatever time he came on at night. And you look back, you're like, wow, you never knew what that man's politics were. He just presented the news. Right. Turns out he was very liberal and very Democrat, but he never let that bleed into his job as a newscaster. Today, that is completely gone. And I think we're worse off for it. And like you say, the press is going to carry the negative and the scandal, because that sells. And does it have to be that way? Is that really why you got into the business? Right. So, one of those challenges in today's society, for sure.
I believe it's, the united we stand, divided we fall. And I hate to say it, but I do kind of believe it's working as intended. I mean, it's so evident that is a deliberate divide when it comes to the media, trying to separate people. Because I don't know what.
100% it is. And maybe we'll see a backlash on it and they'll finally, but you have to admit what you all are doing in the podcast and the rise of streaming has, I think, been a reaction to that, where you're presenting real, authentic, legitimate people and allowing them to view or to express their opinions and answer your questions. And it's not censored and it's not biased and people get what they see. Don't you think that's a reaction to people not trusting the mainstream news media anymore?
Yeah, people want that real stuff.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. I think things are going to get better, and they may not, but it might as well be positive if I get to pick.
I'm always an optimist in this country, Matt. I really am, and I'm an optimist in human nature, to tell you the truth. Yeah. I really am. As bad as some of the stuff we've all seen, I still remain that there's good. Good will triumph over evil. Light will triumph over darkness.
Exactly.
I think the vast majority of people are really good. People want to be happy. There's, of course, a lot of people that aren't happy out there right now, and a lot of people going through very difficult times.
Yeah, but a lot of people want to help other people too.
Yeah.
Yes. They need the chance to do it. People need to know there's a right to ask for help. So we know that they need help.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I have a question. Is there anything in your career that you've never been able to do that you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you one, my biggest regret, and I didn't even know it at the time. I had mentioned that one of my mentors was J.R. Seeger. Mm-hmm. So 9/11 happened in October 2001. The first Americans go back into Afghanistan to start taking the fight to them. And that's CIA Team Alpha, led by J.R. Seeger, who had just been my mentor and my manager here in the U.S. From like 1998 to 2000. So I worked for him, right? And we were doing a lot of counterterrorism things in the U.S. And he kind of saw 9/11 coming, and he was really a visionary leader. And I learned a ton from him. I wish I had reached out to him, because he rotated back to our headquarters in D.C. and then 9/11 happens and he got selected to lead our team to Afghanistan. I wish I had the foresight to reach out to him and said, hey, JR, I just worked for you for 3 years. I'm good on the counterterrorism thing. Take me as part of your team into Afghanistan. But if that's my only major regret that I didn't get to do, I think I've had a pretty good career.
Yeah, I'd say.
Man, you bring up, and I don't know if this is, again, if I bring up anything, you just want to skip to the next topic, by all means, I understand. Yeah. With 9/11 specifically, of course, there's so much crap that people have talked about. Like with 9/11, is there anything that just you question in your career that you're just like, man, why were things released so late when it came to information and stuff on it? And did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, there's none of that conspiracy theory stuff is true. That somebody knew beforehand, U.S. government, absolutely not. That's just ludicrous stuff. Okay. However, if you do the research, and I lived through that era, you understand that there was a ton of warning signs. There was a ton of pre-incident indicators that were all present in the years before 9/11. One of the things the 9/11 Commission report said is failure of imagination, which is true. That really should have said the intelligence community had a failure of critical thinking. And then the other thing that the report said is a failure to connect the dots. And that is also equally true. A failure to see that all these events were related. And we can go back, Matt and Monica, and this is something I teach in some of the modules that I give training on, to talk about critical thinking, to talk about not getting trapped in the analytical traps of biases and assumptions, right? And I'm a big believer in this, as were Confucius and Winston Churchill and Machiavelli, right? That you've got to know past history to be able to forecast and illuminate the future, right? Yep. And so you can go back and make a case that starting in 1993, right? And World Trade Center #1, Ramzi Youssef, and even before that with the assassination of a radical Jewish rabbi in New York City called Meir Kahane, that was the World Trade Center cell. And then they do the World Trade Center. Some of them get wrapped up. Ramzi Youssef escapes to Pakistan, right? In 1993. And then, we eventually capture him and render him back to the U.S. with the FBI. And we think it's all good. Well, even he is saying, hey, that attack that you guys think was a major attack on the World Trade Center, that was a failure. We're going to come back and finish the job. and no one took them seriously. And no one looked at that cell on that network that was around them, many of whom were still out there. Many of them were still in the U.S. Remnants of that cell, you guys, would be part of the 9/11 network. Ramzi Youssef, who did 1993 World Trade Center, is the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who planned and executed 9/11. So it was the same family. We didn't even look at the family around Ramzi Youssef once we captured and arrested him to see, hey, are there any more radicals here? Any more extremists? And by the way, if we would have looked, we would have seen that his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, KSM, was attending university in North Carolina. So those type of things, when you look back and you say, wow, we really didn't know how to do counterterrorism then. We didn't really have a grasp of this network, of this radical ideology that was facing us. And we really underestimated their resolve and kind of their long-term plan, which I call the long war, right? This is a multi-generational war to them. We didn't get that or understand that at all. I would say, although a lot of us learned that lesson the hard way in the next 25 years after that, now we're getting back to a point, and I see it in the classes that I teach, that next generation of local, state, and federal law enforcement and intelligence professionals, they don't get that history. They don't understand it either. And I'm just afraid that we might be repeating that path again of ignorance that's going to let, you know what I'm saying? I think we're much better prepared as a nation now that, we're going to report things, but I just see that happening again. And you got to call it like it is. And we missed 9/11. The law enforcement community and the intelligence community missed all the warning signs of 9/11. We were reporting them. We just didn't put it together in a full picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think people are, I don't want to say getting more comfortable with just being not aware again. So you basically answered my question, are we not seeing it? Are we not putting the pieces together now? Because it's been such a long time.
I think, Monica, there's some truth to that. I think we're much more aware and much more have an understanding of what those pre-incident indicators of terrorism are. Certainly, we spend enough money and resources on this. And when you really think about it, I think the number of Americans that have actually been killed by international terrorism since 9/11, so not including 9/11, it's like a couple hundred. And I know every death is a tragedy. Mm-hmm. That's a minuscule amount compared to the number of homicides in this country every year, the number of people that die from car crashes, bee stings, lightning strikes, whatever you want to say. But yet we spend billions of dollars on counterterrorism, and it's always in the foremost of people's minds, right? So there is a little bit of a disconnect there. But I think we're better prepared, but we are losing, Monica, I think that operational expertise of guys like me and my counterparts in the FBI and local law enforcement who are retired out now and don't have that operational skill set that was so important, and that operational knowledge, that institutional knowledge that they can bring to bear on the counterterrorism problems that we still have.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a really, really big challenge and obstacle for us.
I wanted to ask you, really shifting gears, but it's probably part of my ADD. When it comes to this world right now, and specifically in the U.S., I feel like, and again, this is my opinion, when it comes to law enforcement, accountability, and just what's happening between allowing all these immigrants into the country and then closing prisons and then pretty much lifting accountability when it comes to police officers making these arrests for horrendous crimes, then people getting appearance tickets. And then with the lack of accountability for people that are doing these crimes and they're not charging people, and then between family court systems all over the country just failing people, failing families, it's almost like everything that's happened is intentional cause chaos. And I don't understand.
It doesn't make
I don't
sense.
understand the logic behind it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, neither do I, man. And I think, I don't know if there's a purposeful, all-encompassing plan. I think people are naive and a little bit ignorant on criminal behavior, criminal activity. And to be sure, look, I'm not an expert either, right? But to be sure, I think that I had an FBI, a senior FBI special agent tell me one time, the amount of serious crime in this country, like felony type crime, has always kind of stayed at, I think it was 15%, but I could be, has always stayed at the same percentage for the last 50 years. It's just gotten more in quantity because obviously our population is increasing. So if you have 15% serious crime, people engaged in serious crime, and your population keeps growing, that number is obviously going to grow, but the percentage stays the same. So if that is indeed the case, then that's a good news thing, that the percentage of people engaged in serious crime is actually not increasing. The amount is, because just our population is getting bigger. So that's a statistical problem, right? But I think some of the attitude of people is like, look, we can rehabilitate, we can reform people. And I agree with it. I'm all for that. If we, especially young kids, that we can take, or first offenders, they're not on a good road, they don't have a strong family situation, they don't have a lot of opportunities. Anything we can do to increase and empower people and make our fellow citizens have a better life, I'm for, because that will definitely decrease crime.
Oh, yeah.
But again, I go back to, there is some true evil out there. And you're always going to have that hardcore set of people who want to take advantage of the system, who want to hurt other people for profit, and who are not going to be concerned about doing those things. And then on the border thing, that thing drives me crazy. Because if you look at it, both Republicans and Democrats have done nothing. And I don't understand why we would allow any groups of people to come in this country without vetting and validating them. And again, I go back, we're all immigrants, right? That's the lifeblood of our country. We can do an immigration in a controlled, legal way that feeds this country, that feeds the lifeblood, that brings that entrepreneurial spirit here. We've done it before. We can get back to that. But having open borders is crazy in today's world. That's absolutely a recipe for disaster, which is, I think, is what's happening now, right? They just splashed in the news that a Russian guy who is a member of the Wagner Group, which is kind of one of their paramilitary groups funded by the Kremlin, just got caught crossing that southwest border with a drone and $4,000 in cash. So what was that guy coming here to do?
Yeah.
Right? Not good. That border situation has got to be taken care of really, really quickly.
Yeah, I can't imagine the amount of narcotics coming across the border with it in its current.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. And I'll tell you that because I did that in South America. And look, the South Americans back then would tell me, hey, we're not consuming it here. You're the consumers in the U.S. You are driving this problem. And they were right. Now, unfortunately, what has happened is that the cartels started marketing to South America and Europe as well for consumption to open those markets. So now you have a consumer problem, a consumption problem in those areas where none existed before. So now it has become more of a worldwide problem for sure. But yeah, we're not serious about shutting that down. You know, you look at some of the movies or the series that have been on. If we were serious about shutting that down, we would do exactly what we did with violent extremist organizations: find, fix, and finish. I mean, we did that very well. Matt, you were part of that process, and when you were deployed. But we did that very well. But you were in the service.
Yeah. I did 8 years.
So you were still part of that, right? We did that very well as a country for the past 25 years. If we want to set our sights on denigrating and mitigating a violent group, whether they're terrorists or criminal, we got the tools and the people to do that. All we lack is the political will. We have the political will on terrorism, but we don't with narcotics. And you got to ask yourself why.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, if I think about this, I bet every single human being, every adult at least, has been heavily impacted by drugs in some way, shape,
with at least one connection.
And it's not siloed to like poor people or people that are just not good people either. I mean, obviously, I think I told you my sister, she lost a battle with opioids in 2020, former law enforcement as well. It's just, there's so many families right now going through it. And it's unbelievable. And it goes back, which really frustrates me and infuriates me. I think police officer and law enforcement, their hands are so tied when it comes to dealing with anything. And it's like people have such this animosity against them. And a lot of people probably because of the lack of, I don't want to say effort by any means, but the lack of them actually being able to make moves to cause an actual significant change in the area, especially the area we're in. It's just, things aren't getting better on that front, I don't think. I think they can. law enforcement as a whole, I think they should be paid more. I think they definitely should be paid more. It's unreal.
Yeah.
Salaries are unreal in what they're doing and what they're, putting on the line. But
and look, it's a huge complex problem, right? And a lot has to be done in this country. And the opioid crisis, I know, and I know you know this from the sad story of your sister, is like a lot of that's caused by our healthcare system and how that's set up, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that we can heal ourselves on that. But if you're actually talking about the flow of drugs into this country, we could absolutely make much more of a dent in that than we are if we had the political will. I go back and, most of these things are governed by human behavior, right?
Yeah.
Terrorist organizations, international crime organizations, narcotics cartels, regimes of other countries, they're all comprised of human beings. And we're basically all the same DNA. We have the same behavior. We have brain. We all kind of function. We may not think the same way. But one of the things I go back, I think there was an English philosopher, Thomas Dunn or John Donne, back in the 1600s. He wrote a famous work called Leviathan. And in that, he said, the state or the government should be the only exclusive owner of basically savagery. It should be the only one that's allowed to take a human life in terms of executing someone like a criminal, right? And he made an interesting point in there, and he said, I'm paraphrasing it. He says, the deterrent is that at the core of every human being, their deepest fear is violent death at the hands of another human being. So I kind of believe in that. That's one of our deepest fears, right? So Putin has that fear. Xi has that fear. The leader of the narcotics cartels have that fear. The leader of terrorist groups have that fear. If you as a nation and a government can instill that fear in them, that's probably a really motivating factor for them to mitigate or stop what they're doing. Now, some of them are going to have a radical enough ideology like the terrorists to say, I welcome death, so death doesn't scare me. That's great. Then we'll give you death, right? And we'll reduce your numbers. But some of those other guys, the guys that run the cartels, are businessmen. They're not terrorists. They're not willing to die. You start using our surgical ability and taking those guys out, they're going to start second guessing doing business in our country.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's basic human nature.
Yeah.
And we did that great with terrorist groups. We do it okay with some of the regimes, but man, we're missing the boat on the international organized crime and narcotics cartel.
Man, yeah, I could talk about this all freaking day long. I immediately want to go into foreign and domestic trafficking, and just again, it's something.
It's crazy, isn't it crazy that we have human trafficking in this country and sex trafficking?
Yeah,
that to me, and slavery.
Yeah,
that to me, absolutely. That to me is a zero tolerance. There should be zero cases of that in the United States of America. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but people don't talk
so much
about
better
it.
than that,
And
right?
they think it isn't going on here.
Yeah.
So it's like you talk about it and you're the crazy one because you talk about it or think it's going on here. And it's like,
and it's not necessarily always what people think it is. Like I'll let you, I mean, when it comes to that, you're much more well versed. What are the different kinds of trafficking that are, let's start internally, that people may just not have an envision of exactly what it is?
Well, there's involuntary servitude, right? Which is trafficking, which is slavery, right? Where you're bringing a Filipino maid or a Thai person or someone from the Middle East in here with your family, and they're beholden to you, and you take their passport, and maybe you pay them, maybe you don't, but they really have no other choice other than to serve your family. They may be physically constricted to your home. They can't travel. Again, you have their documents. You have this power over them. That's a form of slavery. The sex trafficking, we know that goes on in our country. Kids underage, kids overage, right?
Yeah.
The human trafficking of bringing people in either for sex or for involuntary servitude is part of that. And as Monica said, it is the most underreported crime in our country by far. It's probably, that's echoed on the world stage as well. And you have to ask, like we do with the drug flow, like Monica says, most people, oh, that's not going on in this country. Why are we not more aware? Why are news programs not doing more of a focus on that? Why are local police and state police not more focused on that? Why, as the allegedly premier intelligence organization in the world, at the CIA in 26 years, I never received one single intelligence requirement. In other words, a requirement to go out and find information on this following subject for the U.S. government. I never received one on human or sex trafficking.
Wow. It's like all of that blows my mind.
Wow. Yeah. Right? It should blow our minds.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, but then people hear about it happening wherever in our country, and they're like, oh my gosh, no way. Do I believe it? I don't know if I believe it. And then it's like maybe on the news, if like some famous person, say, recently got caught doing something or whatever, and then they are like, oh, this person was involved and that person was involved.
That's the extent of it, though. Like,
yeah, but then it's like, then you hear nothing else.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'll sweep under the rug or.
Yeah. And again, you have to wonder, and I think I told you guys I'm the last guy on any conspiracy train, but I am the first guy in any human nature, human behavior trains. If human and sex trafficking is not being pursued in this country the way it should be, if it's not even being illuminated in this country the way it should be, why is that? Yeah. Well, it's not because we can't do it. It's not because we don't have the investigative tools to do it. They're there. We do it against other crimes, right? Child pornography is one of them, which we do a very good job on, right? So it's like the Sherlock Holmes. When all other answers has been eliminated, the one you're left with has to be the correct one. And in this case, I do think there is something to the fact that, do we have these high-level elites that run our country, or are people being paid off, or are they involved with it to some extent? That's the answer to why we're not prosecuting it more fully, and that we haven't become aware of it. It has to be at least part of the answer. It may not be the full answer, but it has to be part of that. And that not only makes me sick to my stomach as an American, but it pisses me off as well that is happening.
As it should. And as you know, we had Nick McKinley on, who's the CEO of Deliver Fund. And I know they're, I guess, combating human trafficking domestic too. And I think there are a lot of people like you that are willing to talk about it, like myself. And I believe there's going to be a spotlight, and especially with like P. Diddy and being in headline news, and assuming, I don't know, again, I have no real political affiliations but Trump talking to Joe Rogan stating that he's going to release these lists. I don't know if I believe that. I don't think he will. And if it's going to be
he should. No, that's part of the illumination of the problem.
Exactly. I agree with you. I believe that list is probably, I don't know. I'm interested to see what's going to happen. This is going to be a wild year.
We saw with the Epstein thing. Come on.
Yeah.
We know there's high level people involved in that. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's no brainer.
Yeah.
What about like external trafficking in the other countries? How big of a problem is it? And I know you specialize specifically in a different type of trafficking. I'll let you illuminate that.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a big problem, and it's a huge problem in a lot of Europe. Has a huge human and sex trafficking problem. I mean, in Africa, still got slavery down there, right? And people getting picked up. It's a worldwide problem, and we can add wildlife trafficking or environmental trafficking into that. The problem then becomes, what's even more perplexing to me is it's just not just a criminal problem, right? Some of the human and sex trafficking, to be sure, comes back to some of these regimes that are tier one enemies, Russia, China, for example, right? A big majority of the environmental and wildlife trafficking comes back to China. So we can now make a direct link that the profits or the proceeds of trafficking of all sorts, human, sex, wildlife, environment, even the fentanyl trade, is funding one of our number one enemies, if not our number one enemy, the Communist Party of China. And I want to make a point on this podcast because it's important. When I talk about the enemies of this country, I'm not talking about the people of those countries. I'm not talking about the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranian people. By and large, and you guys have traveled and you know this as well, most people around the world get along with each other.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the regimes, the oppressive, repressive governments of those people that are not democratically elected, that are the elites of that country. I'm talking about that when I say China and Russia and Iran. So I just want to make that clear on the podcast. I'm not talking about the populations of those countries, because all of those peoples, Iranians, Russians, and Chinese in this case, they're all very friendly with Americans. They're great people. They have great cultures, great civilization, a great history, right? So it's just the regimes that we're talking about. But all that trafficking leads back to the CCP, the Communist Central Party of China. So, by not combating that, we're helping fund and strengthen our number one, obstacle or enemy in this world that wants to supplant us. So again, another reason why we should be doing all we can to stop that sort of trafficking and mitigation, whether it's in our country or outside of our country.
Yeah. Man, well, it's just trying to think of, I don't want to cut to a different subject if you have any questions or anything.
I think of something very small in this, and I think it is very small because I know and I believe that we need to get to the root of the problem. You can't just, put Band-Aids in everything. Yeah. But I also think a lot of, especially younger children, teenagers, whatever, are groomed and manipulated to thinking that that's a normal life. Like they don't know that they're being trafficked. And I think we also need to help that situation. But it's like, how do we help that situation if we don't know if they're being trafficked? Because they don't know they're being trafficked. So it's like this whole cycle that gets to the root of the problem. But then we have to clear this and help all these kids, these people that are being trafficked when they don't know they're being trafficked. So like, how do we do this?
Yeah.
It's just so much.
It's a tough problem, right? So, I would have been doing for a decade since I got out of the CIA is basically counterterrorism training, teaching people in the private sector or in the military or in the police or just normal civilians. Hey, these are the pre-incident indicators to look for of someone going down an extremist pathway, a radicalization pathway. And there's a huge demand usually for that sort of training. Mm-hmm. What there's not a huge demand for, even though we offer it, is similar training on here's the pre-incident indicators of trafficking, of abuse, right? People don't want to hear that. And again, I don't have a great answer for that other than it's got to be this nationwide, government-wide, society-wide response to it to raise the awareness and then say we can tackle this problem as a community. And again, no matter what the problem, and I've seen this worldwide, no matter if it's our country or some other country, it crosses cultures, it transcends cultures, it transcends language and ethnicity. Most serious problems in a society can be solved at the community level without government intervention or with minimal government intervention. And that's very true, whether it's counterterrorism, whether it's, counter human and sex trafficking, whether it's reducing violent crime, whether it's raising up education levels. That's what the role of local and state and federal government should be, is to empower those local communities to deal and handle with those issues on their own, because that's what always works.
Yeah.
Right. Can you hold on
1 second? We got a volunteer firefighter out with his blue lights on, and then my neighbor just called me. So I just want to make sure my neighbor's all right.
Yeah, no worries.
They're not in our driveway, right, babe? Hopefully that wasn't Paul. Sorry, he's a 71-year-old neighbor that is lives by himself. So I just
no worries.
Hey, Paul, what's going on? Yeah, what's going on? Okay. I was just making sure you're all right, Paul. But we're recording our podcast right now. I don't know.
The front, the light on top of the vehicle.
Yep.
You can probably see it, right?
Yeah, no, we can. Hey, I'll call you back. We're actually in the middle of a recording. All right, Paul? All right. You have a good night, buddy. Yeah. Bye-bye.
I just don't know if there's people there. So, and I heard it a while ago, so I don't.
I'd heard that too when we were recording. Well, maybe it was a deer over there. Anyway.
No worries. Got to take care of the community. We were just talking about that.
So yeah, obviously we have like tons of deer around here, and I heard a thought a while ago, and I was like, maybe it was just in my brain, but that was weird. So I don't know. There's a couple of people across the street right now too. So but anyway, if they need anything, they'll knock on the door, I suppose.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something. I didn't know if you're aware, but apparently there's some fires in California.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So how close are you to those? Are you
probably about, as the crow flies, maybe 15 miles, 20 miles. But, middle daughter got evacuated, but her house is fine. But it's really devastating in those areas, especially the Palisades one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be like, I just was reading some articles on the effects. But this is going to be a decades-long effect on those areas and on the city itself.
Yes.
That's how devastated it is.
That's crazy. And
So sad.
we're getting dumped on over here with snow the past couple weeks.
Yeah, we need rain back.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. What are your thoughts on? I wanted to ask you about the drone sightings and all that stuff. I know. I imagine you've probably seen some people talk. Like I don't know if you watch any podcasts, but like as a commander, I'm gonna slaughter his name. I played Commander Fraser, I believe, or talked years ago about like an object they detected on radar and they visually saw it and it moved like, I believe, like 50,000 feet in seconds, like something that was theoretically impossible.
Yeah. So I think there's a combination of things going on here. If so we have obviously advanced research and highly classified weapons programs that are always going on. And, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is always developing stuff like that. And if you go back to some of our advanced weapon systems, like the SR-71 spy plane, the U-2 spy plane, the F-1 stealth fighter, right? Those actual physical pieces of hardware, surveillance and weapon systems were around for years and years before anyone even knew they existed. That's how secret they kept them, right? So why do we think that there's not stuff like that going on now that we, the public, are unaware of? Of course there is.
Yeah.
So I think some of this, not all of it, some of this is simply advanced weapon systems that DARPA and DOD and the U.S. government is testing and developing. Thank God. I hope it is, right? Things that can move really fast like that. Or, remember the stuff about the torpedoes in the water a couple of months ago and all that. Some of it's got to be that. There's one great passage out of, she's one of my favorite authors. Shoot, I talked to you about her. I'm blanking on the name now. Annie Jacobson. She wrote a book called Area 51, and she was talking about all the myths around that. Well, that was it's just a super secret weapons testing site, advanced weapon systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those UFO sightings were actually advanced weapon systems. She talks about, there's a particular passage in there. It's a declassified transcript from an SR-71 pilot, right? And the SR-71, that famous looking, funky looking spy plane from Lockheed that came out in the 60s that looks like a spaceship, right? And it can fly at like Mach 7. And Lockheed Skunk Works developed it and with the CIA in like the late 60s. It was so far ahead of its time. I still think it's the fastest plane in the world today, right?
Right.
And the passage that I read in her book was fascinating. It kind of explains a lot of these sightings, right? An SR-71 pilot said, this is probably in the 70s. I took off from Burbank in my SR-71. I went supersonic and I was flying to Utah to land there at some Air Force base. He goes, it was a completely clear day. I was at 200,000 feet altitude. I was going at like Mach 6. And he goes, I looked down and I could see at 40,000 feet a commercial airliner. And he goes, I knew those pilots in that airliner could see me with how clear the air was that day. And he goes, and I thought to myself, what must they think I am?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And so here you have credible witnesses, commercial airline pilots saying, oh my God, we saw this thing super high, moving super fast. We have no idea what it was, right? Because they didn't know about the SR-71. So I think a lot of the things we're seeing now are that. I think there's a possibility that some of them are, Chinese origin. They're testing stuff. I don't think they're being launched from submarines, but remember we had the weather balloon that drifted across this country?
Yep. Yeah.
So I think some of that is that. And then I think some of it is just ordinary people saying, I want to get in on this or spoof somebody, and I'm going to decorate my drone with lights and all this and make it move weird. So I think it's a combination of all that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I just had a train of thought, and that cop going by just made me lose it.
Stuff.
There was, this was good too. Damn it. I do that all the time.
Was it about like the drones and stuff?
Yeah, I don't know.
So we could talk about, look, what's an emerging threat and what really concerns me. If you ask me
hold on real quick. Hold that thought. Otherwise mine's gone. I really, when it comes to technology, I was going to say my logic is this: if I'm able to utilize Google Gemini or ChatGPT and the things I'm able to do and come up with that, the government's obviously got access to things that are completely untethered, unlimited. And if they have different variants of AI that is completely unlocked, I mean, I would be able to do some incredible things if I had access to that same exact technology. And they've had access to this technology longer than we have as well. I'm sure they could develop weapon systems and stuff just strictly off of the AI and the, utilizing statistics and analytics and stuff like that. So I imagine a lot of that, like you said, is probably just weapon systems and just governmental research that's being conducted. But sorry, that's what I wanted to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, 100% on that.
Yeah.
No, but I think the corollary to that is, and I do a lot of this in what I call an emerging threats module, is look what, wars have always been incubators of innovation, right? Wars have always been incubators of innovation in medicine, in communication, in weapon systems, in transportation, right? It's a horrible circumstance, but they force rapid innovation in all those fields because they're such horrible events, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we have wars going on now, principally in Ukraine and Russia. And what we're seeing is rapid innovations in the use of unmanned systems, whether they're aerial, maritime, or ground systems. And it's evolving at a pace that, in a non-wartime area would never evolve at that pace. Yep. And so what worries me now is all the things we're seeing on the Ukrainian battlefield, right, will be adopted, will be exported from that battlefield and used by an extremist group or used by a regime that wants to supplant us against us or here in our own country. And that's a really scary thought if you think about the use of drones, right? There's drones in the Ukraine now that have AK-47s mounted on them, that have anti-tank weapons mounted on them, that have flamethrowers mounted on them, right? So, and these are just commercially easily available produced drones. Mm-hmm. They're not even like super secret military government ones. So, if you couple that with cell phone technology and the ability to control them over long distances or the ability to pre-program them and then walk away, we have a real problem that's going to be coming our way. Hopefully it's not, but I believe it is, in terms of extremist use of unmanned systems. Again, they could be in the air, they could be on the land, they could be in the water, that are going to be used to target our infrastructure coming up. And it's already kind of started, right? Yeah. So I really worry about that, how innovation in the real world that has legitimate commercial uses can also be used by extremists or regimes against us as well.
Are you familiar, are you versed at all with like AGI, artificial general intelligence?
Yep. I mean, the AI just feeds that, right? And the AI is just going to strengthen that and make targeting easier, make the logistics part of that easier, make probably the design and manufacture part of that easier.
Yeah, right? I agree. And what scares the hell out of me, I work, again, in cybersecurity. It's, everything's being automated. Everything's being set up to essentially replace full-time employees. That's going to be the way of the future. It's going to be the way infrastructure is going to be set up. I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I seem to see that now. But what happens when AGI in something that just doesn't align with what it's programmed to do? It gets into these systems, and people think about, my initial thought's the power grid. And, I never realized this. I heard that one of the most dangerous situations that we have globally right now is the fact that there was a lot of solar activity. I believe the sun goes through 11-year cycles, and in the last cycle, it released a solar flare that was strong enough to knock out like transformers and stuff like that. Right, and they say if that happens, I never thought of this, but when it comes to the nuclear reactors, we're quite close to what's called 9 Mile.
Yeah.
If they don't have electricity to run those reactors, keep those reactors cooled, eventually what happens is a meltdown.
Yep.
And it's not a matter of if, it's when. And I'm sure they have backup generators and stuff. But the question is like, how long do we have if we have a serious grid problem, which I don't know. I hope to God that's not in my lifetime, but it's not far-fetched at all.
Well, I mean, you just look at the effects of tsunamis or natural disasters on the electrical grid and all the problems. And, if you do study the infrastructure in this country, it's quite vulnerable because we've had this attitude that, we're separated by oceans. We have friendly nations on each of our borders, which we do in Mexico and Canada, but that no longer is the case. The threat is transnational now. So, I think a lot of investment needs to be done in our infrastructure improvement I think you would agree on the cyber side, but also the physical infrastructure as well. I mean, if you look at the power system in this country, and studies have been done on it, both classified and non-classified. I mean, there's only about 50 really important substations in this country, in the whole country. If you knock out enough of those, our power goes out in this country. And then you say, well, they'll fix them. But will they?
Right.
Yeah.
You look at the supply line, there's not a lot of transformers of that quality and quantity lying around.
Yeah.
So, we've kind of come into this, and I think COVID really illustrated that supply chain problem, right? And the war in Ukraine again, it's like, it may simply come to, do we have enough of stuff in order to survive a natural disaster? Someone takes down our power grid. Do we have enough backup transformers to quickly repair the system? Do we have enough of the simple stuff, Matt and Monica, enough food, enough oil in the strategic reserve? Do we, if we get into a shooting war with somebody, do we simply have enough guns and bullets? Not even talking about these advanced weapon systems. Can we simply have enough artillery shells and ships and the basic stuff of war to defend ourselves?
Yeah.
And that's what we're kind of seeing, that maybe the non-sexy stuff, like having backups for your cyber systems, having backups for your electrical power grid, having our own pharmaceutical industry manufacture medicines, having our own rare earths that power a lot of our technology. I'm so glad that this administration did the CHIPS Act, which we're going to start to make our own semiconductor chips, which are a huge part of everything in this economy, right? Another huge part is petroleum, right? Being in energy independent. These sorts of things that we can now say, we can do this organically and independently. We're not dependent on foreign supply chains, I think, are a really smart way for us to think strategically.
Yeah.
Do you think that'll ever happen?
I think we're starting to go in that direction, Monica. I think, again, you got to give credit to this administration with the CHIPS Act. They realize that. I think pharmaceutical is starting to move in that direction. I mean, Matt, you would have to tell us, do you think, we're getting energized enough to protect our cyber networks? I mean, I hear, a lot of horror stories about it, but I know we're starting to try to move in that direction, right?
I believe you can only be reactive when it comes to the cyber aspect of things. And that's the scary part. I mean, it's quite hard to make assumptions of what these programmers are able to do ahead of time.
Like, you can protect your own stuff for so long until someone's going to figure out a way to kind of get in there a little bit,
You brought up something that made me just think, and going way off on a tangent here, that I'm very interested to see your opinions on. But when it comes to pharmaceuticals and the foods and the cancer treatment facility, like we had this brand new cancer treatment facility, I don't know how much I believe in the healthcare system. In fact, to the extent I will say I believe there's no such thing as healthcare. I believe what we should rename it and call it is sick care. And it's just the financial incentive. It's so bogus that the way it's set up right now, that with the lobbyist and the same individuals that essentially can manufacture, contribute to, I don't want to say conspiracy, but there's so much money involved in cancer, and we all know that. And it's
but it's all the prescriptions for not just your your health with the food and stuff like that, but
antidepressant.
I was just gonna say mental health. Like, oh, you don't feel good, here's a pill. You're having trouble today, here's a pill, instead of try to do something healthy. Why is it there's no, you don't hear anything about people, just physical fitness, exercise, or eat healthy.
My wife is a surgical nurse, and I've had experience in the medical system, like all of us had, unfortunately. I think everyone agrees there needs to be major reform, right?
Yeah.
What form does that take? I mean, I don't know. I would say that the government didn't put their best foot forward during COVID. There was misinformation, disinformation, there was outright lies. There's a lot of bullshit going on. And so now the federal government has created, especially in the healthcare industry, has created a huge amount of distrust among Americans, and rightly so.
Yeah.
So God, that's so hard to regain that. I haven't studied it in depth, but I do like a lot of the stuff that Kennedy is saying, and I hope he can come in and change some of that. And And I think where you guys are going is with the food stuff too. Like some of the stuff he says, and I dig into it. I'm like, yeah, I mean, we eat so much processed food and so much sugar, and the obesity rates of Americans have gone up so much compared to a lot of the rest of the world. And man, we need to stop that. There's some serious long-term implications of that as a society, as a country. We need to do better than that. And a lot of it, as usual, is driven by big money and special interests, like you point out, Matt. And that's not right. So I hope he really digs into that. They're going to face a lot of bureaucratic and pushback from the lobbying groups, which I think have an unhealthy effect on our government. So I don't know how that can be changed, but it should be. But God damn it. I mean, I want to get back to a point where if you're the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, if you're the CEO or senior leader of a food services company, if you're the president of a tech firm, whether you answer to shareholders or a board of directors or your private company, I get it that you're in it for profit and for growth. But God damn it, let's get back to the place where you have some morals and integrity as well. And what you do professionally is also for the good of your community and your state and your country. Because that's all part and parcel of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of our national security problems we have now are because we as Americans have sold out for the almighty dollar to other interests, other foreign interests, because we just want our bank accounts to get fat. And there's no excuse for that now. And so I take a hard line on that.
Yeah.
And, there's no excuse if you're a C-suite level executive of anything that touches our infrastructure, that touches our health, of a hospital, again, of a pharmaceutical, of a clinic, that you want to run that and you want to give service to people, but you also want to have a moral and ethical guide to what you're doing and trying to do the right thing and not just enrich yourselves or enrich a small slice of our population.
Yeah, and just to add to that, just anybody that's involved with just different organizations or different departments that are, intermingled with the government, there's so many people that know, like, things are just not okay with a lot of these systems that are put in place, they're so inherently flawed that it's undeniable. And it's everybody that's experiencing these systems knows that.
Yeah, but you know what's really weird too is, I could be 100% wrong, but I have seen, I think, families of elites or higher ups or whatever you want to say don't follow the same.
Of course, yeah. It's
anything with, not just like COVID, stuff like that, but health guidelines or whatever. They'll protect themselves and their families, but they don't care about anybody else. And it that right there, I would think would show you.
It shows you the mindset. And and people think, well, the elites are on all sides. It's not just right or left. It's not just Democrat or Republican. And I will say, and I think, I don't think I'm wrong on this either. Like you say, I think there's a level, there's a category of elites in this country. When we say elites, we're specifically talking financially, but we're also talking about power. Who have power in some aspect, right? They generally have a high education level as well, but not always. But let's say they have monetary resources above pretty much everyone else, and they have power pretty much everyone else. And I think they operate by a different set of rules. And I think that has become more and more clear. And you're right. They're going to protect themselves and their family. They're going to enrich themselves and their family. But for the rest of us, they kind of don't give a shit. And that's unacceptable anymore. And I mean, we might sound like Marxists or communists now, but it's not that. It's just that we have a level of strata in our society that has so separated themselves off from the rest. And it would be different if they were like, we're going to try to better our country. We're going to try to serve. And some of them do. But most of them, like you say, are just out for themselves. And they truly, really don't give a crap about the rest of us.
Sad. Yeah.
I agree. And I think it all starts with our youth. And, something that I thought should change, and I'm hoping changes sooner than later, is the education systems as a whole. Personally, like with AI, for example, I was just playing around with it. I came up with a really cool, work plan of how to completely restructure the education system to do individualized learning. And because I'll talk about myself, for example, I learn very differently than most people that I went to school with. And I dropped out of high school my senior year. I couldn't stay focused in just different subject. But and the flip side of things, I'm hyper focused on things that I'm interested in. And I think if you were to take these kids that Yeah, because there are kids that are going to be lawyers or going to be CIA, for example. And there are people that are going to go down these paths, but there are also people that have a more creative aspect of a creative way of thinking where they're not going to be able to focus on these things. And I think rather than labeling people with ADD and treating them with these pharmaceuticals and trying to calm these kids down, you give them something they're interested in. I think there's so much room for advancement for our future generations if these kids were being taught. And I'm not talking about any sort of specific school or anything like that. It's just as a whole, I think that there's so much room for improvement there. Then you see like certain things being taught that are just like so irrelevant and unimportant and have zero value add to these kids.
Well, it makes me really sad because back in the day, even when I was younger, the teacher could teach a way, you know, that he or she wanted to teach. And then if there's some kids that learned a little different, then they would go to them and help them and teach them a little different. But now teachers read from books now. They can't even teach how they want to teach. And it's like their passion for loving kids and teaching children or whatever. It's like they can't even do that anymore. So it's like so robotic and it's not natural and it's harming things, I believe.
Yeah. Again, I mean, you know, in California here where I am, you know, we spend, I forgot how much per student, and we're like, you know, 36 in the nation of the 50 states. And it's like, how can that be? How the LA Unified School District, it's the second largest school district in the whole country after New York. And they have $1 billion plus budget, $1 billion for a school district. And they have almost a 50% not graduation rate from high school. If you carry that out, God, the implications for society are horrible. So why we aren't doing better at that? Like, to me, for a state, education comes first, police and fire 2 and 3. You fund those fully. You make sure that those 3 work. Everything else after that is negotiable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the proper roles of government, right? Of a local government or state government or county government. And I think we've just got our priorities all mixed up, like you say, Monica. And
definitely.
We're not putting enough emphasis on education and hiring the right people and trying new models and new ways and being innovative in that. If this is our future and our legacy, why would we not spend a lot of time and resources on it? Or it's being wasted. We look like we're spending a lot of resources on it, but they're not being used effectively.
Programs.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of financial incentive, unfortunately, when it comes to that type of stuff as well, even with the education systems. But man, I could keep this going for another hour. I will.
We can always do part 2.
Oh yeah, no,
yeah, we can always do part 2. I think that's a great idea, actually.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
we haven't even talked about life philosophies or all that kind of.
There we go.
Definitely do a part 2 if you want.
Yes.
If you see me going like this for like the last half an hour, I can't find my freaking pen.
Probably in the cushion under.
It probably.
Right there.
There it is. Monica freaking hiding it again. So I'm trying to think. Actually, my next guest is actually tomorrow. It's a Vietnam vet, and he's we talked to him a couple times, like you, and again, just such a great guy. If you want any questions you can think of, I'll give you. You don't have to shoot from the hip. And
no, I'm going to shoot from the hip now. Just give me a second. So I would say was he an officer or an enlisted guy?
He was an officer. He was a pilot. I guess he flew pretty much everything there was to fly in Vietnam.
Okay. So I would say my question would be, what leadership lessons did he take away from his experiences in the Vietnam War? That would be interesting.
Yeah, good one.
And then I would say, how has he seen, since he was in a war, how has he seen the nature of war change from when he was in the Vietnam War to what he sees going on in the world today?
Good question.
The nature.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And I think a great question is, does he think war has become more savage or less savage?
Okay. I'll tally that on there as well. I should give him a heads up and be like, hey, these are these questions. I like putting people on the spot.
No, don't tell him. Don't give him a heads up. He'll like to be put on the spot.
Yeah.
I feel like.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Stimulates your creative juices.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, again, specifically with your line of work, I don't know if it's beneficial for you to self-promote your company by any means. But by all means, if you think it's worthwhile, I'd love for you to see where people can find out more information about your company or.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. My company is Tartarus Intel. We're at www.tartarusintel.com. We do private sector training. We do government training. We do law enforcement training. We do strategic consulting, helping people figure out challenges and problems and resolving those. We specialize in leadership training at any level, for entry-level managers, for mid-level managers, for C-suite level managers. And we're really kind of proud of that because we feel like we bring some of the things that we learned in the intelligence community, in the counterterrorism arena, in the special operations arena. We bring some of those principles and we apply it to the private sector, right? So it's a little bit different take on management and leadership, and some innovative new ways of improving your team, of improving yourself as a leader and a manager, and the team around you. So have anybody reach out to me at tartarusintel.com and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Awesome.
I appreciate it, man. I'll throw one more question out, just because I try to ask people this, and I like it. And I feel like your insight is very valuable. I respect you a lot. As far as people just going through hard times right now, because there are so many people that are going through human suffering that a lot of it is completely avoidable as well. Do you have any message for those people that just feel like that life has let them down and they're stuck in a hole and they can't come out of?
Yeah, look, and we can talk about this more if we do this again. I'm a big believer in the kind of Stoic philosophy and critical thinking, right? And the Stoic philosophy will tell you, you're shaped by three things: perception, action, and will. And your perception is, are you accurately assessing the situation around you? Are you being honest with yourself about the people around you and the environment around you and the situation you're in? So that takes a degree of self-introspection, and that's critical. You got to be honest with yourself. Once you've done that, can you then identify the actions you need to take to make the situation better, to get yourself in a better place? And if you do the self-assessment part honestly, then that should identify some actions you can take to make yourself better, to get yourself in a better situation, mentally, physically, financially, whatever it is. And then the third part of that is will and discipline. And this is really hard. And letting go of, I cannot worry and I cannot affect the things that I cannot control. Whether that's the environment around me, whether that's toxic people that are in my life personally or professionally, right? I cannot control that. And therefore, if I cannot control that, I have to try to put that out of my mind and not let that worry me. What I can control, what I'm 100% in charge of, is my own mind and my own actions and my behaviors. And if I focus on those, that I control 100%. And that's going to get me out of the situation I'm in, make me feel better mentally and physically, better my life, whatever it is that you want to make yourself feel better, to be better, to create a better situation about you. If you kind of stick to that formula, it will never go wrong. Yeah. And I think a good degree of that is, you got to have some critical thinking skills too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's part of being able to honestly analyze what's going on, and with the people around you and the environment you're in, and with yourself as well. So I think that's a solid prescription for life and for getting yourself better in life.
Thank you. Yep. That's perfect.
I love that, man.
Perfect said.
I'm so happy I asked you that.
Yeah, good question.
That's amazing.
Well, Bob, it was an absolute honor. This whole experience has been surreal, and you just add to that surrealness. So I appreciate this more than you can imagine. Yeah, I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
You got it. I'll kill the record and hold you for one more second afterward.